When we think about the arrival of the Portuguese in Brazil, it's common for us to come across those beautiful paintings that immediately make us imagine the landing of the Portuguese on April 22, 1500. But was it really like that? Did highly experienced military men really just arrive and disembark in a hostile and completely new land, full of tribes they didn't even know? What was the daily life of the Portuguese like when they came to Brazil in the first 10 days they spent on Brazilian soil? In today's video, we will summarize the letter of Pero Vaz de Caminha, witness the first-hand accounts of the first contacts, and tell the routine of Cabral's troops in the first days of the discovery. So if you love history, become a member of the channel right now so you don't miss any updates here. Pero Vaz de Caminha, the scribe of Cabral's fleet, set out on the expedition that left Belém on March 9, 1500, in a diplomatic squadron bound for India that was made up of 13 ships filled with riches. This expedition was meant to establish a trading post with the Zamorin of Calicut and was filled with gold, jewels, and goods to trade with the Indian leader. And would these ships filled with riches, weapons, and gunpowder be the ones to first land on Brazilian soil? Pero Vaz reports that on March 23rd, when they were passing by Cape Verde, one of the ships mysteriously got lost during the night. Despite no bad weather and a mysterious disappearance at night, everyone chose to continue the journey. Almost a month later, out at sea, on April 21st, they saw signs of land, like large, long floating plants near the ship, which the sailors call botelho. On Wednesday morning, April 22, 1500, the fleet saw birds in the sky, signaling nearby land. On the same day, they saw a large hill, later named Monte Pascoal, surrounded by mountains and forest. And so Brazil was finally sighted. Captain Pedro Álvares Cabral named the region the land of Vera Cruz, and there they dropped anchor a few leagues from the coast. But the Portuguese did not disembark immediately, on the 22nd only. On the day after the discovery, on Wednesday, April 23rd, did the ships approach within half a league of land, that is, only 3 kilometers from the coast, anchoring near the mouth of a river. There, they saw a few men on the beach, then about 18 to 20 indigenous people, all naked and armed with bows and arrows. Nicolau Coelho, the commander who was always involved in dangerous missions, was sent in a boat to scout the river, and so he would be the first Portuguese to make contact with the natives. Upon arrival, he signaled for the indigenous people to lower their weapons, and they obeyed. Despite the friendly approach, there was no proper communication, hindered by the strong waves on the coast, but he offered small gifts to the natives. Nicolau exchanged gifts with the indigenous people, receiving a feather ornament and a bead necklace, which would be sent to the king. Since the sea was rough, Asno returned without being able to talk further, but this rough sea would prove to be dangerous. That night, the winds were so strong that they caused the ships to drag anchor, meaning they moved from their place even though they were anchored. So, on the morning of the third day, the captain decided to sail along the coast in search of a safe shelter to get water and firewood. As they sailed, more and more indigenous people were seen gathering by the riverbank. The smaller ships found a sheltered harbor after about 10 leagues of travel, and the caravels approached and anchored near the entrance to the reef. The pilot, Afonso Lopes, went to scout the area and brought back 2 young indigenous men in a canoe, one of them carrying a bow and arrow. The 2 indigenous men were taken to the captain and received with joy. The letter describes their appearance: brownish, reddish skin, well-formed bodies, and complete nudity, which was treated naturally. They wore ornaments such as white bones pierced through their lower lips without hindering their speech or eating. They had straight hair cut at ear length. The captain received them while sitting in a chair, well-dressed and wearing a gold necklace, while the other Portuguese sat on the floor, showing the difference in hierarchy and culture between the groups. The indigenous people didn't offer formal greetings when entering, but showed interest in the captain's silver and gold, suggesting similar riches in their own lands. Curious, the parrot noted there were identical ones in their land. They ignored a sheep and were frightened by a chicken. The Portuguese offered them various foods, but they rejected almost everything, only tasting and spitting it out. They refused wine and water, using water only to rinse their mouths. One of them admired the white rosary beads and gestured, relating them to gold, suggesting a possible exchange. And after these interactions, the natives lay down on the carpet and fell asleep unconcerned about covering themselves, while the captain ordered blankets and cushions to be given to them. Pervaz reports that they laid down on an alcatifa, a carpet, and, considering that the fleet was full of riches and made to impress the Samarim of Calicut, it is possible that it was large, to cover much of the deck where the Indians would have slept. On Saturday, April 25th, the fleet entered a large, safe bay that could shelter over 200 ships. After dropping anchor, the captain sent Nicolau Coelho and Bartolomeo Diaz ashore, along with the two captured natives, returning them with gifts such as shirts, caps, and beads. He also left exile Afonso Ribeiro to live with the natives and observe their customs. When they reached the beach, about 200 natives appeared with bows and arrows, but they obeyed the signals to disarm. The two natives who were returned ran to their people, crossing a river accompanied by the exile, and then came back without the gifts they had received. Then more natives began to approach the Portuguese. The natives approached the boats, bringing water in gourds and helping to fill the Portuguese barrels, but without boarding the vessels. In return, they requested items and got caps and clothes, giving bows and arrows as gifts. And here comes an interesting point. The natives called the Portuguese and returned the convict, whom they did not want to keep among them, not even the convict. Having gifts to offer to a supposed local chief, Bartolomeo Diaz insisted that the gifts be delivered, and the convict offered them in front of everyone to an older man adorned with feathers all over his body. Other indigenous people wore colorful caps, and a young woman, completely painted, drew attention for her beauty, especially for her loveliness and for being naked. After this exchange, each group moved away. In the afternoon, the captain sailed the bay with other captains, but did not allow them to land on the beach. They only visited the small island inside the bay, where they rested and did some fishing before returning to the ships. At night on Easter Sunday, the captain decided to celebrate Mass on the small island in the bay. An altar was carefully set up, and Friar Enrique conducted the ceremony with great devotion, accompanied by other religious men. The flag of the Order of Christ, brought from Belém, remained raised throughout the Mass, being the first flag to be raised on Brazilian soil. After the rite, the priest preached about the gospel and related the discovery of the new land to the sign of the cross, moving everyone present. Meanwhile, a group of indigenous people similar to the previous day watched with curiosity, and after the Mass, some of them played instruments and performed dances. After the Mass, the captain ordered everyone to board, and they headed towards the beach, displaying the flag of the Order of Christ. The indigenous people met the boats, wading into the sea, some with weapons and some without. One of them, painted red, seemed to guide the others, and Bartolomeo Diaz even walked among them without them showing any aggression. In fact, the indigenous people kept giving water in gourds to the Portuguese, and the Portuguese returned to their ships with music, always keeping a festive atmosphere. Gathered together, the captains decided to send a ship to Portugal to deliver the news of the new land and debated whether they should forcibly take some indigenous people, but concluded that it would be better to avoid conflict. Just leave 2 exiled men. To learn the language and observe the land, the captain ordered everyone to go ashore, to observe the river and interact with the indigenous people. The natives then put away their bows when they saw the Portuguese approaching, but they always remained alert. There was then an exchange of objects, and many bows, arrows, and beads were obtained by the Portuguese in exchange for small items. But indigenous people and some young women appeared, many naked and painted with red and black patterns. Without any shame, the captain crossed the river, carried by two men to meet them. And they tried to communicate about the existence of gold, but they didn't understand. The interaction remained friendly, although marked by curiosity and a significant language barrier. The Portuguese continued exploring the region along the river, where they found abundant water and palm trees with hearts of palm that they harvested and ate. Many indigenous people across the river were dancing and enjoying themselves. Diogo Dias, who was the quartermaster of Sacavém, accompanied by a bagpiper, crossed over and danced with them, taking them by the hands, which caused joy and amazement among the natives. But despite the friendly interaction, the indigenous people soon became somewhat suspicious again and moved away. The captain then led the group along the beach to the great freshwater lagoon. While the boats continued along the coast, some indigenous people approached the sailors and took a dead shark that the Portuguese had captured. The account notes that even when they seemed at ease, the natives would quickly withdraw again, always maintaining a cautious attitude. The indigenous people remained wary and avoided sudden approaches, causing the Portuguese to act calmly so as not to scare them away. The captain again gave a gift to an old man, who after getting a cap, soon moved to the other side of the river. The two natives taken to the ships never returned, reinforcing the Portuguese impression that they were very suspicious people. But despite this, the Portuguese admired their strong, clean, and healthy appearance, suggesting that they lived outdoors, since they had not found any structured houses. The exile Afonso Ribeiro, following orders, tried again to stay among them, but was once again sent away by the natives. And after this experience, everyone returned to the ships. At dusk on Monday, the Portuguese went ashore to fetch water and found fewer natives, with fewer weapons and closer than before. There was an exchange of objects and greater interaction. Some Portuguese were led by the natives to where they were, the women and the young people bringing bows and feather ornaments in exchange for small gifts. They observed their bodies more closely, painted with red and black dye made from local fruits. And the captain sent the exile Afonso Ribeiro and others to try once again to live with them. They then walked to a village with 9 or 10 large communal houses made of wood and straw, with hammocks and indoor fires, each sheltering 30 to 40 people. The indigenous people offered foods like yam, which was probably cassava, and seeds, but at nightfall, they asked the visitors to return to their boats. The Portuguese returned with parrots and ornaments, which would be sent to the king. On Tuesday, the Portuguese went ashore to gather firewood and wash clothes. The indigenous people approached unarmed and in large numbers, helped carry firewood and played with the Portuguese. 2 carpenters began making a large cross, which the natives watched with curiosity, especially because of the iron tools they were unfamiliar with. The interaction was so close it disrupted the work. The captain sent the exiled men and Diogo Dias to the village again to observe more about local life. While cutting wood, they saw parrots and some birds in the area, suggesting an abundant wildlife inland, and at nightfall, they returned to the ships with wood. On Wednesday, the Portuguese did not go ashore, as the captain spent the day reorganizing the supplies. Among the 12 ships of the Praia expedition, they saw about 300 indigenous people gathered. Diogo Dias and Afonso Ribeiro, the envoys from the previous day, returned because the natives wouldn't let them stay overnight in the village. They brought green parrots and other dark, white-beaked birds. When a Portuguese man named Sancho de Toir returned to Paranal, some indigenous people wanted to accompany him. He accepted just 2 strong young men, treated them well, fed them on board, and they slept comfortably on the vessel. Otherwise, the day had no significant news for the report. On Thursday, the last day of April, the Portuguese returned to land to fetch water and firewood. The two young indigenous men who were staying on the vessel ate well and accompanied the group on land. Many indigenous people appeared, about 400, and showed great familiarity. They helped carry firewood, ate together, and some tried to drink wine. The captain explored the nearby forest, observing the great abundance of trees and palm hearts, and also ordered everyone to kneel and kiss the newly erected cross. And the indigenous people respectfully imitated the gesture. Pero Vaz even interpreted this as a sign that they could be easily converted to Christianity. He also noted that they did not raise animals and lived on roots, fruits, and seeds, always keeping their bodies strong and healthy. The natives showed increasing friendship, danced to the sound of the tambourine, and wanted to go to the boats to see. They spent the night on board, received with comfort to encourage their approach. On Friday, May 1st, the Portuguese disembarked to install the cross in a more visible place and carried it in a procession, accompanied by more curious indigenous people, some helping to carry it. After placing the king's coat of arms on the cross, Portugal set up an altar and Friar Henrique held Mass. In front of about 50 or 60 natives, the indigenous people imitated all the religious gestures, kneeling, raising their hands, and remaining in devout silence, which impressed the Portuguese. During communion, some indigenous people called others to watch, and an older native even pointed to the altar and to the sky, as if he understood something sacred. In the ritual, after the Mass, the priest gave a sermon relating the gospel to the Christian mission of the new land, strengthening among the Portuguese the conviction that those peoples could be converted to the Catholic faith. After the Mass, the Portuguese distributed 10 crucifixes to the indigenous people, placing them around their necks, and many received them with devotion. The captain invited the indigenous man, who had indicated the altar and sky, to lunch on the ship and treated him with great distinction. And Pero Vaz reinforces in his letter the idea that if they understood the language, they could easily become Christians, because they show great innocence and the absence of their own religious practices. 2 convicts stayed to learn the language, and 2 cabin boys ran away to live with the indigenous people. Pero Vaz's final account is the most impressive part. He notes the coastline's length and the land's fertility, with good water and a healthy climate, but found no signs of precious metals. But in his words, the best fruit that can be produced there seems to me to be saving these people. And that should be the main seed that Your Highness should sow. After all, the greater purpose must be the expansion of the holy faith. Caminha mentions that the innocence of these people is such that Adam would not be much different from them when it comes to showing their nakedness. He repeatedly stresses in the letter that a clergyman should arrive soon to baptize them. The letter is simply fascinating. It shows a completely different worldview. And Pero Vaz, impressed by the natives' innocence regarding clothing, can't help but relate them to Eden. And many times he shows emotion, especially when describing them attending Mass, and when Friar Henrique de Coimbra related that journey to the expansion of the faith, just as the apostles did. Pero Vaz, however, would not live to see more. After leaving Brazil and going to India, he would be killed there, attacked in an uprising of Arab merchants against the Portuguese. But his precious accounts immortalized the contact between 2 civilizations, and he was able to describe the encounter between 2 distinct worlds in extremely detailed fashion. Did you know the details of Pero Vaz de Caminha's letter? What surprised you most? So, go ahead and leave your comment right now to support our work and take the opportunity to become a member of the channel right now. That way, you'll be able to dive deeper and get to know the fascinating Iberian history even more.